Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. We invite coaches, athletes, and industry leaders in our community who are willing to open up about their setbacks and successes to educate and inspire our listeners. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Chad Vaughn, and on today's episode, we are interviewing Dawn Fletcher. Dawn is the CEO and founder of Driven Mind Training, formerly known as Mentality WOD, and Dawn is an incredible resource when it comes to harnessing the power of what the mental side of training can actually look like. She's worked with over 20 CrossFit Games athletes, Olympic and national level competitors, Marines, entrepreneurs, doctors, coaches, tons and tons of athletes of all different levels, all different backgrounds. I had a great time talking with Dawn a little bit about what it takes to actually maximize the potential of every day that you're in the gym. Some really great take-home points that you can apply to your training no matter what your goals are as an athlete. I found it really interesting to talk a little bit about what mine and Chad individual struggles were when it came to the mental aspect of being an elite athlete, and some of the things that we did well, some of the things that we wish we would have known when we were younger athletes, that hopefully you guys as coaches, as athletes can apply now no matter where you're at in your fitness journey. Dawn has an incredible background. She has a master's in kinesiology with a focus on sports psychology. She's a certified strength and conditioning specialist as well as an L3 CrossFit certification coach. So she has a wealth of knowledge and a ton of background coming not only from the academic side of it, but also having been in the gym for many years coaching people. So we hope you guys enjoy this one. Hopefully there's some great take-home points for you guys to apply.
All right, Dawn. So I wanted to jump right into this recording with telling a story about one of my first interactions with you, and something that I definitely learned from you and I've taken to heart and tried to make a change. And, after you pointed it out to me, I'm going to tell this story, but I'm a little bit embarrassed that I did it, right? Especially with how meaningful it is. And I completely understand where you're coming from, but you came to my session at my station at Power Monkey Camp, and I had some handouts. We were doing mobility assessments, and on this handout were a list of the assessments that we were going to take. And then there was like 5 choices that athletes could circle to indicate where they were at level wise. And what I'm trying to do with that is get athletes to understand what their most in need areas are. So, right, we're using that and we're going to say, okay, these are the 1 or 2 areas that stick out the most, and this is what I want to work with you on. And so in that, I had words like extreme inability and insufficient, pass, which maybe that one isn't so terribly bad, but those extreme words that I was using, when I first handed that to you, I saw the look on your face and you were utterly, I think, in shock. And you had some statements that I'm sure that were just a reaction. You couldn't control what you were saying and everything else. And I completely understand. And, what I wonder is that when you went over and you said, basically saying, hey, there's a better way that you could word these things. And I have since changed those. And that I went over that with you at camp. But with that wording, like extreme inability or insufficient, what do you feel that was going to lead the participants to that would have taken away ultimately what I was trying to positively accomplish?
Thanks for sharing that. I don't recall, did I actually come up to you and say, hey, this could be better? I think it was just I thought there was some laughter, and then I remember you coming up at the campfire saying something, but I don't remember how that went down.
Well, yeah, Don, I'll say you didn't come up to me and you didn't say, hey, you didn't make any recommendations. I don't know that that's your style to
no.
somewhat overstep in that way. And I wouldn't have taken it that way, but it was very understandable to me where you were coming from. And I took from you that needs to change. There's a better way that I could say that. And that was unsaid, but certainly it was understood on my end.
That's cool. Thanks for taking that, Chad. Yeah, I think it's just that a lot of athletes may struggle already with feeling insufficient or feeling like they're struggling with something, or they're putting themselves out there in a vulnerable way, coming to your squat station where you're a master at this and you make it look so good and so easy. And so doing some self-assessment or reflecting on themselves and seeing those words in front of their face, like, hey, you thought you were insufficient, but now you got a circle, you're insufficient, or you're extremely incapable, or whatever, extremely, what was the other one?
Extreme inability.
Extreme inability, right?
Yeah.
Like that's tough. And that's not only again, sometimes it goes deeper than, are we just assessing my ankle mobility, or is
Right.
someone taking that more personally to a deeper level? Like, this is actually a reflection of myself and my character, and I'm already feeling less than, or I'm already feeling not enough. And I'm at this camp with these all-stars, these amazing athletes and coaches, putting myself out there, or trying to put myself out there, but then that can feel like another like dagger to the heart type thing. And so I think I was just recognizing that, like, damn, I know I'm circling extremely inefficient with my ankle mobility. My back's hurting, my hips hurting, I'm feeling old, I'm in this squat. But I'm thinking about a lot of my clients, and I'm thinking about a lot of people that I've talked to over time, and thinking that could be a tough one.
Mhm.
So yeah, maybe there could be a better way at letting people know they're not quite there yet, but that isn't
Mhm.
necessarily something that's tied to who they are, or um, said with language that could be really tough to swallow.
Yeah, well, like I said, I appreciate it. It's certainly, one of those little things. I'll put those in quotes, little things that I think has made a big difference in my coaching and also my writing. I mean, it inspired me to go back through a lot of the blogs that I've written, and just to make sure, and I'm going to continue doing that, to make sure that there's not at least a slightly different way that I could save it. And there's at least a couple blogs already that have changes towards telling people the same thing, but in a better way. And so my wording before there, Don, was certainly on the extreme inability level. Uh, so hopefully
That's so good.
hopefully I'm at a better level at that, and I'm working on it for sure. And I think it's a good learning opportunity for a lot of coaches out there that might be listening to say, hey, just think about a little bit what you're writing or what you're saying, and is there any other way that I could speak? And then obviously what I'm sure we'll get into as well is on the athlete side, how can I try to think about different words or use different words for myself?
That's cool, Chad. Yeah, I'm always continuing to learn and listen, and try to study that as well, so I can be a more effective communicator, and make sure I'm sensitive to all populations.
Now, when you were teaching your lecture at camp, it was one of the things that you kind of brought up quite a bit. How you speak to someone matters, right? The words that you use,
Yeah.
the positivity that comes along with it. And from my personal experience, I've had coaches that um, kind of it's had a wide spectrum in terms of how they approached teaching an individual athlete, going from way negative, throwing things and like just over the top negative and thinking that that's going to get the most out of an athlete, to ones later in my career that were much more positive and were much more every single turn matters, and let's see what we can kind of
Mhm.
do as effective as possible, but using a positive atmosphere and a positive kind of interaction. Is it universally accepted that a positive approach works across the board, or would you say that it really becomes dependent on the individual? I think I heard you say that you like to someone, a coach to you, you like to hear some feedback that maybe you wouldn't use with somebody else, and
Totally.
understanding that the individual matters. But what would you say with your interactions with the people that you work with? Is it a majority of the time that you'd recommend using a positive approach, or is it more figure out who you're working with and kind of go from there?
Yeah, in my experience, I think it's totally dependent, because the word positive is very subjective. What you may feel is positive for you may feel different for me or for Chad, etc. So I like to use the word, instead of thinking about it as like positive communication or positive talk, I like to use the word helpful. Is it helpful for you? Is it helpful for Chad? Is it helpful for myself? And that's for the athlete to determine, and to be able to assess and then give feedback to their coach, ideally, and say, hey, that wasn't helpful for me when you said it like that. Or I really liked when Dave, I really liked when you coached me like that. That was really helpful for me.
Hmm.
And so I think positive, I think generally people think positive is just like rah, rah cheerleader style. And that's not necessarily it, because that doesn't work for most people. And especially high level athletes, we're looking for something a little bit more specific and tangible than that, with a little bit more direction and instruction. And so I would say, positive is just a very gray word, and I think it's very subjective. I try to use the word helpful or unhelpful, and ask the athlete to determine what is that for them, and then get them really good at communicating and being honest with the coach about what style they like and how they
Hmm.
like to be communicated to. And that's where some of my coaching comes in, is in helping the athlete identify what's helpful for them.
Yeah.
And that would be what's positive for them. That doesn't necessarily mean it's raw language. It means they're able to tell how they like to be spoken to. And that changes too, right? Because if I'm feeling really good and my confidence feels high and I'm doing something that I love, you can speak to me in a different way than if I'm struggling with something and I'm feeling really low that day. Maybe I have some personal stress going on, and I'm feeling just kind of, emotionally sensitive. Then it's important to talk to that athlete in a different way on that day. So the coach-athlete relationship is incredibly important, and that open communication style obviously will help the athlete get more out of themselves.
Yeah, I think that's incredible way to approach it. And I think you're right. Like I always look at it as being positive, but you're right. Like helpful is a better way to be thinking about it, considering that everyone needs to be spoken to in a different way to maximize their potential or, what they're trying to achieve in the gym each day. Do you
Right.
find it possible, and you're talking a little bit more about understanding as an athlete what makes it work for you, but the coaching side of it is just as important, right? Like you
Mhm.
are the mental coach, but say you're coaching an actual coach that interacts with people on a daily basis. It's just as important for them to be able to have the skills to understand what to ask, when to back off. Do you work with coaches as much as you work with athletes? And do you ever work with both at the same time as a mediator to be able to say, like, let's figure this out together to figure out where your points are and how you can actually achieve the most with this person next to you?
Yes, both, all of those situations over the past 10 or 15 years. I certainly work with coaches. A lot of the times now I am more the like assistant coach or the mediator between athlete and coach. So I always try to keep great rapport with their head coach who is normally doing their programming. But sometimes that programmer is off site. So they're doing a lot of like virtual conversations or online communication, and they're talking with me weekly so I can get more insight about how the athlete's doing, how they're interpreting things, and then be able to give feedback to the coach and make that, again, just a better all around communication. So yeah, I play all those roles, I guess, and you're totally spot on that it's just as important for the coach to have a great understanding about how to speak to the athlete and look for those different markers, I guess, and that different feedback that they can get to see if they're on the right track or if they're, again, being helpful or hurtful, and being able to communicate that with the athlete. But they typically can't do that without some type of coaching,
Hmm.
because none of us know until we know, right? I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
until I knew, and now I'm just trying to pay it forward.
Yeah. And I just want to mention one thing too. As an athlete, for those listening, it's okay to not know, right? Like I didn't know my whole career until like at the end what kind of athlete I was in terms of what maximized my ability level. And I wish it would have been something that was presented to me when I was
Mhm.
younger and be able to say, let's focus on these things, or let's see how you perform under these conditions. Does this make things better? Does this make things worse? And that was never really presented to me until like way late in my career. But I think it's really important for people to understand that it's okay to not know and to use it as a stepping stone to say, I'm going to become a better athlete by taking the time, just like I do putting more weight on a barbell or spending more time on my handstand, to spend more time to be understanding what makes me perform the best. And I think that that's really important. Like it's a skill that you need to learn and you need to spend time on, just like you do, anything else.
Yeah, it is really
Mhm.
sad when you think about it, Dave. I agree as well. For me, it wasn't until the end of my career where I figured out how to really make myself click. And it was really me making myself do it, because it didn't, to me, matter a whole lot what anybody else said to me. I mean, I had good supporters and they were, positive or helpful, as you say,
Mhm.
Don, in more ways than I can think. But it was mostly, something within myself, things that I needed to say to myself and everything else. And my hope is that we can, you know, uh, use professionals like you, Don, and us all working together to try to speed up that process a little bit for a lot of the people that we work with. And certainly, it's exciting to me that that's basically what your expertise is, Don, and what you're doing. And I wonder, when someone reaches out to you for help, whether they're an athlete or coach or the combination of the two, and you have an initial conversation with them, what is it that you're specifically looking for or listening for or asking as, the major piece of information or the few major pieces of information that you need to put a plan in place?
In those first conversations, I'm really trying to get to know the person as best as I can, not just as an athlete, but in all their roles, what's important to them, what their values are, some of their history, what's brought them to where they are, and what obviously it starts with their why. Why are they going after whatever it is that they're chasing? That can give me a lot of information about the person. If they tie that back to their values, if they're going after it for a certain reason, again, depending on their history and what's brought them to where they are, it paints a pretty good picture for me in determining how I can best assist them. But the question that brings about a lot of insight is, what do you believe is holding you back or limiting you in any way? And that's for the athlete to determine. I'm coming into this with a blank slate. I have no idea about anything about them. I try not to do, unless it's a very, very popular athlete, I haven't done much studying about them. I try not to like research and learn about them. I try to just allow them to tell me what they believe is holding them back or limiting them. If they give me some examples, that's great. That's great information. That's great data. That's great insight. If they don't, I ask them some more questions so that I can find out from my point of view what may be limiting them. Because again, sometimes the athlete doesn't know. So I dive in a little bit deeper to see if I can help them make some more connections as to why they aren't where they want to be yet. Because most of the people I'm working with are very high performers and they want like performance enhancement. They want to get the edge. They want to get better. It's not that they're coming to me necessarily with a big problem or something's wrong, or, sometimes that's the case and it's very clear. But other times it's just, I want to get better and I just want your help because I believe that this is an important aspect and I've heard about this, I've read about this, but I would love some assistance in helping me gain the edge. And so sometimes it's not very clear that there's something necessarily quote unquote wrong. It's just that we want to learn how we can expedite, like you said, their results and why aren't you where you want to be yet? Sometimes it's a time thing, but managing their emotions around that goal is really critical.
Yeah, it's exciting to me that there are a lot of athletes reaching out to you to do that, especially on the elite side, because thinking back on my career, I don't know that I would have been able to allow myself to admit that I needed help when certainly for a large part of my career, I did. And, unfortunately for me, I didn't reach out or I didn't have anyone to mentor me in that way. So I kind of had to figure it out on my own. So I hope this can be, a motivation to someone out there listening that might be struggling a little bit, and accept that you're struggling and it's okay to get help. I mean, we're talking about the mental part of the game, and no one wants to admit that they're struggling a little bit. Again, self-talk, I think some people would say weak, they're weak, right? In that regard. And so hopefully this can help for sure. And I wonder, what is the most common first step that you find yourself taking with people?
It's always about helping the athlete grow in awareness, their own personal awareness of themselves, to have a greater understanding of themselves. And so that does vary a bit, but I try to ask the athlete questions like, what things do you love and appreciate about yourself? How do you handle stress in unhealthy ways? How do you handle stress in healthy ways? Asking them questions to help them gain a greater understanding of their tendencies, their habits, their thought patterns. And then also, obviously, I gain a greater understanding as they're going through some of those drills and exercises with me, or doing some of those journal prompts and reflections on their own. So it's really a lot of questions, and a lot of questions that are directed at a specific purpose, a specific intention, to get that athlete to grow in their own understanding of themselves. Because once we understand our tendencies and habits, then we can experiment and practice and try new things. But if I'm just giving them stuff to practice without understanding their tendencies, then we're just, shooting at nothing. So it doesn't always follow an exact pattern, but it is always aimed at growing in awareness. And that's, again, something that's ongoing. As an athlete, you could be competing for 20 years, and no matter what, you're going to continue to evolve. So continuing to grow in awareness is always going to be helpful for your growth, and it's always going to help you improve your performance. As long as you're gaining greater understanding about yourself, you're learning, you're evolving, you're growing, and you're getting better.
Sounds exactly the same as any change that we're trying to make, right, Dave? With mobility
Absolutely.
or positions and technique, we have to, we're not just going to throw random drills at you. We need to know where you're struggling and why you're struggling, and really get to the root of the issue to make the changes. So it's exciting to hear you say it like that, Don.
Yeah, it's it was so cool to be around all of you at Power Monkey, because my goal has always been to help normalize mental training, just as someone hires a nutrition coach, just as someone hires Hinshaw or any of you guys for anything that they want to get better at. Is the same thing as, how can I gain an edge at any of these specific areas and make it really normal and really common, because it's part of our athletic pursuit. It's part of our personal pursuit that's going to make a very big difference on what I'm doing. And so it functions in the same way. You know, you don't just give someone a random workout or random handstand drill or random squat drill and just say, like, good luck with this. You find out where they are, you gain some knowledge and awareness, you have them implement some things, you recheck back in, you see how they're doing, and you continue that process. And so it functions in the exact same way.
Yeah, I go ahead, Chad.
I was just going to say, to follow up on that, like, we're talking about individualization to help make change, but at the same time, you know, as a programmer, I write a lot of weightlifting programs, a lot of mobility programs, and there is always an importance to, you know, understanding or knowing more about the athlete so I can give them touches of individualized work. But at the same time, I do believe there are great general programs out there for weightlifting in general, weightlifting technique, developing technique, maintaining technique, or same thing with mobility on a general basis, things that, you know, almost anyone is going to benefit from. Do you feel like that's the same for what you do?
Yes, just like what I explained about understanding how you respond to stress and what positive mechanisms do you cope, what ways it might be unhealthy. Again, just any questions about growing in awareness, what traits do you appreciate about yourself? Any of those just general questions of self-awareness are always going to be helpful for anybody.
Just asking yourself those questions and reflecting on any given phase in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
I want to build on that question a little bit and talk a little bit about how we've been limited in our interactions with people in person over the course of the last year. And, you know, the coach athlete relationship has probably changed in a lot of ways, especially with, you know, the types of coaching that maybe a lot of our listeners do, owners and box owners and things like that, where we're doing a lot more remote coaching, and we don't get the daily feedback of what that person is actually going through. We don't get that, you know, a sense of how their day has been. You just send them the programming and then get the feedback through videos or whatever it might be. Have you noticed any techniques or anything that, you know, a coach might find beneficial virtually that's been a good tool to be able to use during this time where we're not as in person with people as we have been in the past?
Yes, absolutely. And I truthfully think it's something that people could be using in spite of how often they're seeing their athletes or what style of remote coaching or programming they're doing, is implementing just some additional questions to the person's programming, or some additional questions. A lot of people are using True Coach or something similar to that, where they're prescribing programming, but to be able to also ask the athletes about their stress levels, 1 to 10, and what's going on for you. Is anything being affected in your core controllables, which I say are sleep, nutrition, mindset, like what's going on there, and being able to help the athlete identify, again, stressors, and then also being able to help them identify like what's positive, what's good. And even if this is just done on a weekly basis, so the athlete overall can just assess themselves, what's going on with the core things I can control, what's affecting my stress levels, and what's going on that's good and positive that I can share with my coach. And that may be stuff that's outside of the gym that they're not seeing on video.
Mm-hmm.
But it just improves our communication to be outside of like the outcome numbers that they're getting on their lifts and their metcons. It's just helping them paint, again, a better picture of what's going on with the athlete. So if that comes from the coach, it's going to be more likely that the athlete then expresses those things, versus the athlete just saying like, I want to tell my coach what's going on. They might not do that if they're not being asked. So sometimes even just putting an additional box in there for like athlete check-in. Hey, tell me a little bit more about what's going on with you, how you're feeling, what's going on with you mentally, emotionally, things like that, and actually implementing that into their programming. So it gives them the opportunity to share a little bit more. I think that can really make a big difference. And checking in, like most athletes want more FaceTime with their coach, even if it's 15 minutes, like get on the phone or get on the FaceTime, a Skype call, Zoom call, and just like, hey, how are you doing? And ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
That really helps an athlete feel cared for beyond, again, just prescribing programming and following up with their numbers, but ask them more questions about themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tool. And, you know, I think both Chad and I and a lot of our Power Monkey team use True Coach. It's a phenomenal kind of resource to be able to interact like that. I had a few clients over the course of the pandemic where, you know, I thought they were doing just my programming. You know, the initial assessment is, you know, they're doing what I'm prescribing. We're doing 5 days a week of gymnastics training. And a couple months in, they're like completely shot and like, they're broken down or like, well, what's going on? Like this should be in line with what you can handle. They're like, well, I'm doing Metcons 4 times a day on top, 4 times a week on top of what you're programming. And then I go and do a 10-mile hike on Sundays. And it's like, whoa, like I had no idea that you're doing all this additional stuff. Like those are the kind of things that we need to communicate with each other to make sure that I am appropriately giving you what you need so that we're not just crushing each other. So those questions are so important. Absolutely.
If
Not
you
just for
don't
mental
ask,
state,
right,
but
they probably won't tell.
right, exactly. So
Yep.
just more than likely, it's got to come from the coach to kind of get that conversation going.
For sure.
Yeah, I think it's easy for us to assume that, everyone knows what we need to hear, right? And that's definitely not the case.
So, Dawn, you were a three sport athlete in college, right?
Yeah.
What did you play?
So I went to a Division III school so that I could play a couple of sports. I played soccer in the fall, basketball, which carried over a little bit, and then got recruited to run track. So I did that for 2 years.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean, what was your athletic career prior to getting college? Did you do a variety of sports in high school as well?
Yeah, I played soccer, basketball, field hockey. I pretty much did everything or tried everything when I was a kid. And when I was a youth, I was really most drawn to basketball throughout my career, but I found soccer a little bit later and really enjoyed that and didn't want to give it up when I went to college. And that ended up actually being my best sport, my favorite sport. And then again, just like I loved being active. I loved being more structured because it helped me better with my time management, especially in college. And the being on a team was huge for me because that's where I grew my relationships and just have all of my best memories.
Sure. So my question has to do with you being an athlete at a pretty high level collegiately, myself and Chad both being athletes. I want to know what got each of you guys to compete at your best. Like, if you can pinpoint it, what type of athlete were you personally in terms of mentality, your state of mind when you knew that you were at your peak? Similar to what we were talking about earlier in terms of trying to find out what that is, that each athlete is slightly different. Can you pinpoint what mindset you need to be in for you to perform at your peak? And did you know that while you were competing in college? And Chad, I want to know what your answer is on this too, in terms of mindset, when you were able to lift the best.
Do you want to go ahead, Chad? Okay. I think it has changed, honestly. I think I would have said at the time when I was in college and I was really competitive, I think I would have said, like, bring on the challenge. The harder the challenge, the better my game is going to be. The better the opponent was, the higher I was going to raise my level. So I think I would have answered with like, more pressure, more challenge is better for me to step up my game and to bring my level of what I believed I was capable of. And I typically did perform my best whenever we played the harder teams or the better teams. That certainly changed after college when I got into competitive running and started doing races, marathon training, 5Ks, 1-mile races. And I actually had to start to like convince myself that it was only for fun. Like I had to totally switch that and be like, I'm just going out there for like shits and giggles. And I'd get on the starting line, then like 3, 2, 1, go. And I would, race everyone till like I almost died. But I had to actually like really lower my stress and lower the expectations come a little bit later in life.
Is it because you were a beginner again? It was something completely new?
I don't know. I think because I just would get so stressed out about it. And I would like, my psyche was changing, like I don't know. I think I was just really building myself up, too much pressure, too much stress and expectation. Right. So I had to like pretend that it was like no big deal and like almost tell my friends and family like, oh, I'm just going to like do it for fun. But I was really going to win. And I typically would win, but it was like not without all of that stress beforehand. So I don't know, it's changed. And I haven't competed or raced or done anything hard like that in, I don't know, too long. So I don't know what I would say now.
Interesting. Well, you did just do an adventure race not that long ago up here in Oregon with one of our other Power Monkey staff members.
Now
Kogan,
it's all fun. Now it's literally pure. If I'm having fun, I will do good.
Awesome. What about you, Chad?
Well, first I want to say, Don, 3-sport athlete. I didn't realize that, and what an opportunity to learn more about yourself and how to compete. I mean, that's awesome, and that's what I try to tell athletes all the time, especially if they're struggling. They get to competition, and for weightlifting, we have 3 attempts in the snatch and 3 in the clean and jerks, and they're regularly making only 2 of their lifts or whatever that may be, and they just can't really find their way out of it. One, I'm trying to help talk them through that on the mental side and everything else, but another part of that is a part of their training needs to be going to more competitions, in my opinion, to help learn more about themselves. And one is kind of like, get back up, if you fall down, get back up and try it again, type of mentality. So I think it's incredible that you had such an opportunity. But for me, and I can't believe this is the first time you heard me say this a few recordings ago, Dave, but it kind of goes very much along with what Don is saying, maybe just in a little bit of a different way. But it was all about having complete freedom from the end result, having that complete freedom. And when I wasn't tied to those results, when I wasn't tied and thinking about and dwelling on whether I was going to make the lift or not, or I didn't care about any outside circumstances. I knew that I was going to go execute each lift, one lift at a time. And I was going to put everything I had into it with the ability that I had to focus in that moment. So it didn't matter what happened in the warm-up room the day before, the week before, what I did in training. If I didn't sleep well, none of that stuff mattered, because I knew that I was going to be able to execute with freedom from the end result in the moment. And that's what I really try to, train my athletes on more, honestly, for me, more than the physical part of it. Yes, I'm doing tons of mobility with them if that's what they need, tons of drills with them if that's what they need. But more than that, I talk to them regularly about focusing. How do you focus, or how do you execute a cue, and how do you stay in the moment? But I definitely, like I said before, learned that the hard way for a longer than my career than I care to admit. Literally my focus out there on the competition platform, or when I was trying to lift heavy in training, was desperation. It was me literally saying to myself, please don't miss this. Please don't miss this. I'm standing behind the bar. I'm trying to visualize a successful lift, and I can't even make myself make it in my head. I approach the bar, and still, as I'm lifting the bar from the floor, literally that phrase went through my mind 3 times. Please don't miss this. Please don't miss this. So I'm incredibly lucky that I was able to make anything during that phase of my career. But it really taught me, as I experimented in training and tried to just find a way to keep those negative thoughts out of my head, and to keep distractions from entering my head and disturbing my performance. That's what came out on the other side, was just saying it's a hard way to explain it, but it's a level of, I care enough because I'm going to be as aggressive as I possibly can, but at the same time, I don't give a shit, So it's a level of a combination of those two things, but it all ends in freedom from that end result.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that too. I wrote that down.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way to approach it. And for me personally, I always found that, and this took me again decades to figure out, but to compete a little bit with a chip on my shoulder, where I felt like I had something to prove, because I always felt like an underdog. I wasn't the most talented guy. I just worked my ass off, and step by step, piece by piece, was able to kind of make my way up the rungs. And I always felt like I competed my best when I went out there and was like, I'm going to prove to you guys that I belong to be here. I belong here. This is a place that I've earned a spot, not just to compete on this stage, but to be on the podium. And that allowed me to kind of have the mindset that I needed to not worry about who I was competing against, or, that there were guys that were much more talented than I was. But the mindset for me was not easy at all. It was actually one of the hardest things for me to actually start to kind of wrangle in. And the frustrating part is that I've come across athletes that it comes really easy to. And I had a couple guys on my team, national team members, Olympians, that they couldn't care less about competing or being in front of 1 billion people on, NBC and everybody watching, or, it didn't matter to them at all. And I wasn't like that. And I think sometimes I would see that and say, I need to be like that. I need to be able to do that. But I finally recognized that I'm just not that person.
Yep.
And what you need to figure out is, okay, what works best for you? And I think this comes back to what you were talking about, Dawn, about answering those questions about who you are. And it's so important. Don't compare yourself to someone else that succeeds in a different way. And I'm curious, from your perspective, Dawn, do you, as an athlete too, did you come across people that the mental side was just super easy? And is that something that's fairly common? Because in my case, I find it to be actually an anomaly, but I have seen it every once in a while, and it's incredibly frustrating to say, like, why doesn't anything affect this person? And am I doing something wrong because they're able to do it and I'm not?
I always say everyone has their own thing. So if competition day was easy for them, there was something else going on, or
Right.
something else that there was a struggle
Right.
with, you know,
Right.
maybe it was their interpersonal relationships, maybe it was school, whatever. But like, I always try to let athletes know, like, everyone has their own thing. I mean, I know you guys have been in sports a long time, you know, decades we're talking about, and all the experiences we have with like other teammates and coaches, like everyone you've ever met has a thing, right? Or like numerous things. And so um, it we can look at other athletes. I think we can learn things. We can say, hey, what's working for them? What do I sense in that person is maybe something I can pick up? Like I just wrote down that Chad said freedom from that end result. I think that's really like helpful advice. But I'm not going to try to be Chad. I'm going to try to understand myself and then see if there's anything else helpful out there that others are using that may be able to be helpful for me. But everyone has their own thing. So that's always what I try to remind athletes. Like if it looks easy for them competing today, okay, maybe it is, but there's going to be another struggle that they're going to have along the way.
Sure.
Let's continue to focus on you and whatever the hell you have going on and try to optimize that.
Love that, especially in a sport or an individual sport like a CrossFit or weightlifting or
Oh
even
yeah,
gymnastics, where you're less reliant on a team member to have to interact with. You know what I mean? Team dynamics is maybe slightly different in terms of the mental side, where you're collectively going for a particular goal as opposed to you being out on a platform individually. Would you say that that's the case?
absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned, and I think it kind of builds pretty nicely on our conversation here, is just getting uncomfortable and the importance of being able to get uncomfortable and to be able to understand how to get back to a state of normalcy. Um, from the athletic perspective and athlete side of things, it's important, but also from the coaching side, you mentioned that it's important to kind of get uncomfortable. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to be able to get uncomfortable and how you see that as kind of a beneficial factor in growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that again, it comes down to having some awareness about in what situations are you uncomfortable or what things would make you feel uncomfortable. When have you felt uncomfortable recently? What things do you see other people doing that you're like, oh shit, no way, right? What
Hmm.
do you feel resistance towards in your life? Again, as an athlete, as a coach, as a person, that's a great question for conversation. Again, that's something I dig into with everybody I work with, is helping them identify what they have resistance towards. From there, hey, are you willing? Are you willing to do some experimentation? Because they have to be willing. If they're not
Hmm.
willing, I say, okay, cool. Let me know if you ever are and call me again later.
Sure.
If they are, I always let people know, like, we can like put our toe in the water and do like little teeny, like small experiments, or we can cannonball into the water, like with fear, with discomfort. You can take it on in different levels. It doesn't have to be so scary and overwhelming that again you begin to have like a bad relationship with doing things that are uncomfortable. I try to keep things fun and try to keep them enjoyable, experimental, playful. Words like that typically help people want to practice things that are uncomfortable more, and if they're not so daunting.
Hmm.
So as we all know, that's how the greatest growth occurs, is continuing to find what's uncomfortable for us, what we have resistance towards, and practicing seeking after that in a way that is rewarding for you, that is valuable for you. It's not just like daunting. Most of us are already going through uncomfortable things in life anyways. So when you talk about doing things on purpose that are uncomfortable, a lot of people shy away from that because they're like, dude, I'm stressed enough already. Like, leave me alone. Like,
Hmm.
too much going on. Like, but when you say, hey, like, there's freedom on the other side, there's inner peace on the other side, it can actually be exciting, it can actually be life-giving and fulfilling and meaningful, then people are like a little bit more enticed.
Hmm.
Like, I'd be a little bit more willing to take an ice bath if I know that I can feel like the most alive I've ever felt on the other end. And so getting people to appreciate and understand that doing uncomfortable things doesn't have to just be like really hard and daunting and stressful. It can actually be enjoyable, and you can dose it in a way that you actually have a really positive response to it and want to actually continue to do it.
Hmm. Absolutely. And we had a big sign up in the gym at Stanford when I was almost 25 years ago that kind of resonated with me. And I'm seeing a lot of people kind of use a form of it, but the idea that the strength comes in the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that I always kind of used as a point for my whole career to kind of go back to, like, there's a purpose behind
Love
the
that.
struggle that you're going through right now, and it's when you're going to become better at the other end of it because of that struggle. So I really like that mentality. I think there's a lot of benefit to kind of having that mentality.
Y'all are dropping some good one-liners here.
Oh yeah, we're all about them.
Hey, we're all about putting on a show. Putting on a
Yeah,
show. That's
yeah.
it. No, well, but the thing is, Don, that we do a lot of coaching and we do a lot of teaching, so we have to, whether we realize what we're doing or not, or whether we knew we were going to have to or not, you have to find ways to say things to get people to do what you want. Like, I was trying to do something very positive with that sheet that I handed out, and I got to make an adjustment to that to get them to do what
Right.
I know that they can do, to get them to perform positively and get the positive result that I want from it. But certainly, talking about being uncomfortable and making yourself do those things. One, that's one of the reasons why I love CrossFit so much, because every single CrossFit workout is uncomfortable, not only physically, but mentally. Like, you're going to hurt and you have to do it, so it's such a mental strengthening sport for sure. And any sport is, but CrossFit in particular. But it is so fulfilling to do anything. One of the things that's hard for me to do with people that I don't know, and you guys are going to completely understand this, is to initiate a conversation. So anytime, like, I can make myself do that and I actually have, a couple sentences of a conversation or however long it is, I feel very good about that. I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, I can do that. Let me try to do that again, and Power Monkey has helped me with that a lot. But, when you talk about jumping in the deep end with someone or taking small steps with someone, what is the most common, or one of the most common things that you have them do?
Well, what you just talked about brings up a great point. And I mentioned this at my talk in Power Monkey, is that a lot of athletes are willing to do the physically uncomfortable things. Like, they would rather, like, I'll push hard in the gym, right? I'll do something really long or really heavy or a crazy Metcon. And they're like, yeah, they're down, like, no questions asked. But when it comes to doing something that's mentally uncomfortable, emotionally uncomfortable, that's where they're like, oh, hell no, right? A lot more resistance. And so that could be something as simple as asking for help or initiating a conversation with somebody, putting yourself in a social situation. For some people, slowing down or stillness is something they have a lot of resistance towards. And so it's, again, an interesting conversation. With non-athletes, doing something physically uncomfortable is typically really challenging, really hard, right? Getting yourself to put yourself out there. But people who are athletes, we have so much experience and we actually have such a passion for pushing ourselves in many ways. That's not really the hard thing most of the time. So trying to identify what are those things that you have mental resistance towards, that's where the gems are. That, and for everybody that's different. We might just say, hey, let's practice this week, ask for help 5 times. Chad, initiate 5 conversations at Power Monkey with a stranger, right? Dave, whatever, right? And so finding out for each person, like, what they have some of that mental resistance towards, and then again, having them buy into the concept that this can actually be really fun, enjoyable, life-giving. You're going to learn a lot. And the cool thing about the people who I'm working with is they're coming to me because they want to grow and they want to get better. So it's not like I'm pulling teeth. I'm not making somebody do anything. I'm giving them offers and options and talking to them and brainstorming with them about things that they may be willing to try, and we go from there.
That does make it so much easier. What you just mentioned there, the people that are coming to you know what they're getting into. You're a specialist, right? And I see that the big difference in me and doing what I most love to do as a coach and a teacher. It's mobility, helping people make changes there, helping them solidify positions, and teaching them to focus better and to ultimately move better. And when I coach CrossFit, even though I have so much respect for anyone that does CrossFit for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, teaching a CrossFit class is completely different because there's, to be honest, there's a little bit more babysitting involved, right? So they're there to be social. They're there to get a hard workout in, to breathe hard. Most of them aren't there to get expertise on weightlifting technique and change their mobility, when that's what I would always try to dig into them with. And I learned the hard way that, I need to change myself a little bit as a CrossFit coach to be more what they need me to be. And it was always just completely different than someone that signed up for a weightlifting class or that signed up for my weightlifting program online. And it is way easier to coach them, through that avenue.
That's your wheelhouse. That's your
Yeah.
wheelhouse
Yep.
though, right?
Yep. Yep.
Where the technique side of things, you can slow things down and really kind of get after it. So it's important to know. I completely agree with you, Chad, that the person that comes to each of those is slightly different.
Yeah,
Yep.
but I wonder, Don, do you kind of see that same thing? And I don't know if you do any CrossFit coaching, but have you been in scenarios where you're coaching a group of people that aren't necessarily there for mental training, but yet you find yourself like trying to say and do things to get them better in that way?
Absolutely. When I used to coach CrossFit classes, I would always be throwing in my 2 cents like, hey, before this workout, everyone come up with an intention about what you're going to practice. I'm going to come around to you. I'm going to find out what that is before we start. Or afterwards, when we're stretching, I'm asking them to reflect. Hey, what did you learn? I see you wrote your score up there. I see you wrote your time up there, but I want to know what you learned, and we're going to share that in the group. So I would always be throwing in my little mindset pieces and nuggets in there, and not everybody appreciated it, of course, but there was people that were staying afterwards to talk to me, and that's what that's what I was drawing the most like joy from, and that's why when I knew that I wanted to make this my career, I guess.
Well, it's important to note too that you're a CrossFit L3 coach, and make sure our listeners know that you have some. It's not just that you were a coach; you actually have some experience at the higher level in terms of coaching. L3 is actually you find L3 coaches few and far between. So you actually have had a lot of experience actually working with people in the gym on a regular basis.
Oh yeah, that's all I used to do. I mean, I've been coaching CrossFit and CrossFitter since like 2008, but my experience used to be in a global gym. So I certainly had that experience of working with people who weren't motivated to be at the absolute top. They just, were general pop and had some type of goal. But I was always most interested in, again, the mental aspect of either what they were chasing and why, or what was keeping them back, what was holding them back, and always trying to speak to that and always trying to coach on that, because that's simply what I loved. And I wanted to try to draw the people to me that shared that commonality.
I think that's great. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the tools. And again, Chad, these are all, whenever we have these conversations, I always find out more about you, Chad, and your training methodology. And
it's just because you don't listen to me otherwise, Dave.
No, I rarely listen to you unless you're talking about handstands.
Exactly.
I rarely hear you.
It's like, oh, here he goes. He's talking about the squat again.
But no, I get insight into you as an athlete, right? Because most of our conversations are around the coaching side of things now. And, I think we forget that we were athletes sometimes because we've become so entrenched into the coaching world. But when we have these kind of conversations, it gives me a better perspective of who you were as an athlete, Chad, and how we can kind of like take some of those things and kind of pass that along to our listeners and the people that we work with. But I want to go into some of the things that I found late in my career that I really applied on a regular basis to kind of get my mental mindset into a better place competitively. And Dawn, I want to hear from you as to whether or not you find these things to be beneficial, things that maybe you would suggest to other people, or if these are just nonsense that were kind of in my own little world. Totally. And then Chad, if you had anything that you found specifically beneficial through your own kind of testing over the years. My first one that was most effective for me was visualization techniques. And what I would do prior to a routine, or as part of my training, especially as I got older, where I couldn't spend as much time training, where my body would just get beat down so much that I had to do much more mental training than actual physical training. I would use a technique where I would visualize a routine or a skill that I was learning in 3 different ways. I would visualize in slow motion. And slow motion, because I found visualization techniques early on in my career to be ineffective, really ineffective, because I was so mentally weak that I would see myself performing bad things. Like all I would visualize was me making mistakes, me falling, me screwing up, me getting hurt. And it was more of a detriment than what is a benefit. And I was like, I can't visualize things the way that I want to. So all it's doing is pulling me in the wrong direction. But I found that if I slowed things down and almost had like, TiVo in my head, where I could go in a really slow motion through a routine or a skill, see every little aspect of that movement. If I made a mistake, I would rewind and then slow through the movement again in real time until I saw myself doing it correct. And the more I was able to use this slow motion technique, it allowed me to get more comfortable, more confident in saying, okay, I can get my mind to work in a visualization technique that actually is positive and not just a detriment. So this slowed down version really allowed me to jump to this next variation where I just did it in real time, as if I was doing the routine, saluting a judge and going. And then the third variation I would use was the perspective of the judge or the crowd. And I would watch myself from the outside and what was the judge seeing? What was the audience seeing? And being able to see that perspective as well. And I found that to be hugely beneficial, especially that motion variation that I found kind of helped me kind of get visualization to be a technique that worked. What do you think about visualization? And do you see any kind of holes in what I was thinking?
That seemingly helped you a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly the point. That sounds awesome, Dave. I know very few people, very few athletes that say that they're that comfortable with visualization to say it's something that they do with consistency and it's something that they think is effective. Obviously, the consistency piece comes first because you've probably through your years watched a lot of film. You've probably studied a lot of other gymnasts. You've probably done a lot already that primed your mind to be able to visualize that because you had so much repetition in your life. So you knew what you were looking for. You knew how it felt. You knew how it looked. You could go into those perspectives really easily because you had years of repetition. And that is the part that it takes in order for it to be consistent and then for it to be effective. So, you had some periods where you said like, oh, it wasn't really helpful for me because I was like seeing myself mess up. But then you were able to stick with it consistently, rewire it, retrain it, and then it was able to be beneficial for you. So that is going to be typically helpful for somebody who has a longer career and who has done that a lot and is able to, again, have a lot of repetitions and experience in both feeling it and seeing others do it successfully. So honestly, that's awesome skill that you developed and took somebody hopefully encourage you to take time to develop that because it's not instinctual for a lot of people.
Well, would you say that watching film and things like that would be beneficial as well? Like watching other people and yourself kind of move. Obviously, we recommend that from a technical standpoint, but I find this a little bit interesting because we do it a lot in gymnastics. I'm curious whether or not you find it for the mental side to be helpful as well, even if it's watching other people.
Yeah, because that's how you get the vision to be able to visualize, right? It's very tough for us to visualize things we've never seen before. You know, some people again are better, more imaginative and creative like that. Other people that it really doesn't work as well for them. But seeing over and over and over repetitions, like knowing exactly where your hand's going to place, exactly where your hand's going to place, and watching that a lot of times makes it then easier to turn off the video and close your eyes for you to see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's hugely important. And I'm going to tell a quick story here. So sit back and enjoy this one. No, but one of the things that we used to do quite a bit when we were Team USA is we had a really good exchange program with the Japanese team where one year we would go to Tokyo and then they would come to the States and train with us in Colorado. And I always envisioned myself trying to compete the way the Japanese competed. The Japanese approach to gymnastics is extremely artistic. They want gymnastics to not only be done big and exciting and fireworks, but done beautifully. It's an art form. It's a performance. You're doing it to make the impossible look feasible, the impossible look like the person watching at home say, you know what, maybe I can do that too. And they did that better than anyone else. And I had a lot of Japanese coaches in my career, and I always kind of really appreciate that approach. And I remember whenever we go and train with the Japanese guys in Tokyo at their training center, we would go train all day and go and eat at the cafeteria. And then at night, which was very different than what we would do in the States, the Japanese guys would all collect in a room, put gymnastics videos on, and all watch old gymnastics routines together. And they would just watch gymnastics and not even critique, but just like, check that out. Look at where he put his hand there. Look at the way that he's turning. Look at where his eye line is on these things. And there was such an approach to the way movements were broken down that I had never appreciated or seen prior to having that experience. And I think that was a huge stepping stone for me to be able to say, there's value here. There's value in analyzing other people's movement as much as there's value in analyzing myself. So I think you're right that it came later in my career because I was exposed to it, not until like the last 5 years of my career. But I think that's hugely important. And it came because of those experiences for me.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's awesome, Dave. And it's cool that you found that helped you. And as we were talking about earlier, only if it could have happened a few years sooner.
Yeah,
right?
always.
But I'm like you as well. I like I was saying earlier, I was never able to visualize movement successfully. I mean, yes, I was able to make myself make a lift or whatever, but it was never anything that I found to be beneficial to me. And when I recognized that, one of the things that helped me get out of that slump was I would start visualizing feelings. So what that meant was I was approaching a lift, and I would stand back behind the bar and I would say, okay, try to feel what it's going to feel like when you make this lift. Or I'm going out for my last attempt and it's going to win the competition. Hey, it's going to feel really good when you make this lift and you win this competition. And I would have a brief moment of the feelings that I knew that I would feel. I would feel proud. I would feel thankful and happy. And then I approached and did the lift. And that was one thing that helped me, um, get over that slump that I was talking about. And another thing to go along with feeling is, as I was training, and I would try to obviously apply this in competition with competition lifts as well. Again, just trying to find a way to get those negative thoughts out of my head to keep myself from saying, please don't miss this. It started off with me just focusing on being as tight as I possibly could from the floor. And what that meant was that for me specifically, I felt as much tension in my mid back as I could. And I put all of my effort and energy on feeling that action being accomplished. And then that helped take me through the rest of the lift.
Mm-hmm.
And what that turned into was me thinking of a few other things through the lift that I could pick out and feel. And ultimately, it turned into 3 focal points for me. So feeling tension from the floor, feeling the bar close to the body, and then feeling myself violently extend. And when I was able to develop that skill of feeling my way through the lift, and then I started teaching other people to do that and getting experience and understanding how it was helping them as well. But what I found that it did for me and what it does for other people is it creates a shield. It creates a shield around your mind. So if you're feeling your way through the lift, if you're so focused and intently giving everything you have on feeling the actions being accomplished, then it doesn't matter what happens on the outside. A phone could go off in the crowd and it's not going to penetrate because you are working so hard at feeling those actions. But that to me, Dave, is the tool that I used. Again, not sure how that happened or why it happened, other than me just trying to find a way to not let that phrase dictate my performance in a negative way, and ultimately created that shield for me and allowed me to have that freedom from the end result that I talked about earlier.
Love it.
Next time, I just want to interview you two about like all of the tools and strategies you've used and what you've learned, because you both have so much valuable insight. I'm sure people are just like writing things down and thinking I have to listen to this again, because they're just being able to pull, like, I think there's so much value to being able to share what didn't work for you and then what you did to try to get better, instead of just like, oh, I'm great and here's what I do, and I'm great and here's what I do. It's like, what about the struggle? What about what wasn't working for you? What like did you see in other people, again, that you either tried to copy and you're like, oh, that wasn't my thing, or I was struggling with this for so long, or I realized that was ineffective, especially as you evolve through a career, because again, it changes so much based on once you have experience, you're a different athlete. So you're always trying to look for new ways to optimize your performance, and the more things you learn about yourself and others, the more books you read, the coaches you have are able to influence you, and then you're able to pick up these gems and then implement them. It's so cool to hear about both of your journeys.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to, obviously to have you on and to talk about these things, but, I like speaking with Chad about it too, because, we can bring some perspective from the athletic world as well, and give some insight into how it all kind of packages together. I did want to talk about 1 or 2 more, and it's interesting because like I'm going through these in my head and saying like there was a list of maybe 10 things that I use on a regular basis that I knew kind of helped me get certain type of music, and certain words that I would repeat, or phrases before I would do a routine. But one that I've heard you talk about is like, maybe not in the same words, but creating a routine for the routine. And the way that in gymnastics, a routine is basically what you're showing in performance. And I would create a routine prior to the routine, so that no matter where I was competing, I knew that previous routine, the one that's prep, I could mimic that same thing and give myself the setting as if I was in my own gym. So I would chalk up the exact same way. I would do the same breathing techniques. I would say myself, I would start on the exact same side of the apparatus. I would walk up to the apparatus in the exact same way, so that the prep, and it gave me runway, essentially. It gave me enough runway to be able to take off once I actually touched the apparatus. So that routine for routine was so critical for me to be able to say, okay, no matter where I'm at, this piece of equipment is now exactly like the one that I'm used to competing on or working out in my own gym. Is that routine? Do you have a phrase for something like that? Or is that something that you would normally use as a tool?
Yes, absolutely. Again, it's important that that routine can also be flexible, because otherwise it becomes a ritual that
Right.
we are reliant upon, and then that can
Right.
be a stressor if we're unable to do it. So it's typically, it's called creating a start routine. And you can even think of this if you're in the gym generally as a CrossFitter, and let's just say you coach the 9 a.m. class and now it's like 10, 15 people are leaving and you're about to start your own training, is creating a start routine. It's basically a signal to yourself that you're transitioning into being an athlete, or it's now my time to train. It can be something so simple as like bringing your gym bag out to the whiteboard, or writing your workout on the whiteboard, or putting your shoes on, or whatever it is to signal to start your routine in a way that signifies to yourself that I'm entering my warm-up period, my prep period, my workout time. And then building in some routines, and it can just be a few simple things that can be carried over to events, like you were saying, that that you can rely on to give you that kind of like safety, that reassurance that I've done this before, I know how this feels good for me, this helps get my body ready, this helps get my mind ready. So creating a few of those rhythms or routines that are transferable across all spectrums of environments and competitions and events, that you're not so tightly wound to, or tightly bound to, that they become like controlling or a ritual in that sense, that like if you don't do it, something's going to not work out in your favor. But it's so critical to just have some of those rhythms and routines that again, you can rely on, that that you can bring along with you, that you build into your training practice, and that can carry over into your, most importantly, is when you want to perform your best, is when you're at the events or at the games.
Oh, I love that flexibility aspect to it. Just being
So critical.
don't be rigid, right?
Yeah.
Remember people
Rigidness
say,
won't take you far as an athlete.
right. Like saying
No.
like, I need to eat this thing before every competition. Then you go to, another country and they don't have that thing. And you're like, okay, now what am I supposed to do? Now, like I'm screwed in terms of my
Totally.
pre-competition preparation because that power bar is not there, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I wanted to add to the ritual part of that. You mentioned rituals, and I think rituals are very dangerous as well. I certainly fell into those at some point in my career, like to the extent where I've got to be on the same platform in training every day. I need to face the exact same way.
Right.
And I even got to the extent for years where I had, I guess what you would call nervous twitches. So I would get up and grab the bar, and I would always have to, rub my ear against my shoulder 2 or 3 times or whatever it was before I would then lock in and go. And I noticed that was another thing that was limiting me and holding me back. And so I started making myself lift on a different platform, or, from one heavy lift and training to another, I would face in the opposite direction, and I would purposely chalk differently or purposely approach the bar at a different speed. And what I would do, it challenged myself in that way. And I would challenge myself, because this was at the same time when I was developing my ability to feel my way through the lift. I would say, okay, can you approach the bar in this different way and then still turn it on at the last moment and focus the way that you are and make the lift, and some other things that will kind of force you into doing things in a little bit of a different time. And I don't necessarily recommend this for everyone, because so many athletes out there need to slow down a lot, right? But, I would do what are called clusters. What they are groups of 5 reps or however many reps, but you're doing them, say, every minute on the minute, or even something like with 15 to 30 seconds of rest or whatever it may be. But you're on a clock, and you're making yourself lift heavy with a very short amount of rest. And that's just for general training and preparation purposes, but it's also incredible mental training, and, forcing yourself to focus and execute in the way that you want to, no matter what happens, right before specifically. But I do agree that routine in some regards is incredibly powerful. And I would say me being routine and ritualistic in the beginning of my development was very powerful, because it helped me be more consistent with setup and movement. And not enough people are even doing that. Not enough people are even grabbing the bar at the same width, So in that sense, you need to develop some strong routines. But then as you go and as you develop and get to a different phase in your career, a different level, that's where you got to start being flexible and I think challenging yourself in this way.
Couldn't agree more. Like continuing to practice adaptability and flexibility, and then maintain rhythms throughout that. Like if you can be flexible and adaptable, and then know like what rhythms you can insert to again help ground you, help you perform your best, help set you up, help you feel prepared, but do that in a way that you're not allowing it to control you.
Don, how often are you working with people that are kind of under your roster, athletes and coaches, just as a recommendation for upkeep with people's mental game? How often do you think it's kind of important to kind of check in on this stuff?
Almost everybody I work with talks with me weekly or every other week, and some people just monthly. Most people I'm talking to weekly, especially if they're prepping for season or if they're in season. There's a lot that can come up. We may even talk more times than that, but it's typically an hour a week, weekly or every other week. And some people, if it's out of season and they're on a pretty, consistent training schedule, nothing crazy going on in their lives, and they're just doing check-ins with me monthly. But most people, it's more frequently than that. And they're doing some like drills and exercises, readings in between our calls.
Mm-hmm. And you had basically the brand that you're under was Mentality WOD for years.
Yep.
And recently trained to Driven Mindset and
Yep.
Driven Mind Training. Is there a reason why you transferred things over? Is it because you're trying to expand beyond just CrossFit market into other areas? But can you tell us a little bit about the brand in of itself and kind of where you're at with that?
Yeah, thank you. Over the summer, I actually have never loved the name Mentality WOD, but I jumped on that train early in like 2013, whenever Mobility WOD, Gymnastics WOD were all getting started. And I wanted to be the person to really capture the mental aspect of CrossFit. So that's when I created Mentality WOD, which started out as a blog and then information and then programs and coaching from there. So it's always really confusing to say what that is to people outside of the CrossFit space. And it was kind of a clunky name to begin with. So it was challenging always to explain, hey, what I did and who it was for. And I always wanted to expand outside of CrossFit as well. So that this summer, kind of when everything happened with CrossFit, and I was thinking about the name change anyways, and it just spurred me into action to be able to say, hey, how can I expand this in a way that lets people know what I'm talking about? Driven Mind Training, or Driven Mind is really the business name, but Driven Mind Training just expands more than just to the CrossFit population, and it's a lot better sounding when you're just talking to the general public who don't really understand the WOD term. So it flows a little bit better. So Driven Mind Training, yeah, it's just mindset training for all athletes and driven individuals who want to try to optimize their potential. It can be anyone with a goal that they're chasing after, and the types of coaching and services I offer are aimed at helping that person.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And it seems like, while you've been in the CrossFit community for over a decade now, and a variety of different, athlete, coach, you've kind of had a few different hats within the arena. You are pretty active within a lot of different other physical activities, between your adventure racing and your triathlons and your running and your track and field. Like, you seem to have a hand in a lot of other spaces. Do you see yourself more as kind of an all-around athlete, not just kind of a CrossFit space? And what do you really enjoy doing the most when it comes to your own training?
Yeah, that just changes. What I enjoy doing the most is something new, something novel, something that's going to, again, push me, especially from a mental avenue. Like trying to look for ways to just continue to challenge myself all of the time, so I can not only practice what I preach, but so I can stay fresh as a person, just so I can stay excited about what I'm doing and about life. So I'm always just looking for new ways to challenge myself and push myself, and especially in ways that I haven't done before. So that's what excites me the most. And I don't necessarily train for those things, but I just try to stay generally fit so that I can participate in any crazy challenge that I want to do. So if someone calls me up and says, hey, you want to do this thing next week, I'm normally down, especially if it's going to be something that's uncomfortable, new, different. I love being outside. So anything that's adventurous or in nature, or something where I can check out, like, or be outside and be connected is what I love the most. I don't love being in the gym much anymore. Like, I'm 30 minutes in my garage gym or less on a day-to-day basis, but I don't want to spend 2, 3, 4 hours in a gym space anymore. I did that for so long. So I'm just looking for ways to expand myself, whether that's surfing and adventure racing, or doing a Spartan race, or I don't know, whatever, just stuff that's outside of the gym and that's active and that's outdoors is what excites me. So I'm going to continue to push myself and grow in those ways. Yeah, as much as I can.
continue to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
I mean, I'm pretty chill in my normal like day-to-day life. I'm pretty comfortable. So like,
right.
you know, I'm in SoCal and just like, you know, my schedule is all under my control. And so it allows me the opportunity to push myself.
Right. Well, before we get you out of here, we got a few last minute questions, ones that we like to ask all the guests. First one is, what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
I'd have to say gymnastics.
Yes. I had no idea where this one was going to go, Chad. I really thought
painful. Did you not hear? Did you not hear how weightlifting taught me to be mentally stronger? You didn't hear that?
I did, and I appreciate it. I mean, I like to do like my functional bodybuilding, but I know that's not what we're talking about when you say weightlifting. So I'm going to go gymnastics just to play it safe.
Perfect. I mean, Chad, you're going to have to do a better job of getting guests on that are in your corner. But I'm absolutely crushing Chad at this point.
I'm sure.
I have extreme inability to get people to say weightlifting on that question, so I've got to make a change there.
Even weightlifters sometimes. Weightlifters
for sure.
So funny.
So I appreciate the nod to gymnastics. But question number 2: any guests that you think would be good to have on the podcast? Anybody that you've come across recently that might be a good guest for us?
I'm always trying to support other female coaches and entrepreneurs. So I don't know if you've had like a Michelle Latondra or maybe Denise
She
Thomas.
was our last podcast guest.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
EC Skinkowski, Denise Thomas, I think just retired from CrossFit. So that may be a good guest too, 10 years in the mix.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, those are two really, really good recommendations. We need to get on that for sure, Dave. And
absolutely.
And even Michelle, I'd love to have her on again. I think there's a lot more that we could talk about with her. Certainly incredibly valuable information. How about books? Have you come across any books here recently that you'd recommend to the listeners?
Oh, I'm always reading something. I recommend Crucial Conversations. Read it. It's a really good one. All coaches, athletes, people, it gives a lot of skills for how to communicate in high pressure conversations, especially uncomfortable conversations, and just it gives you the tools to be able to be a better communicator. So I really like that one, Crucial Conversations.
Nice. I haven't heard of that one before. I'll have to check it out. And I don't know, every time I say I'm going to have to check that out, Dave, but we got such a long list at this point.
We just have a library over here of beautiful books that haven't been opened yet.
Definitely. But that sounds like a really good one for sure. Now, anything you got coming up that you want folks to know about? I know you talked about Driven Mind a little bit. What is that specific website? What is the Instagram handle, and anything that you want folks to know about?
Yeah, you can check it out at Driven Mind Training and drivenmindtraining.com. I just released about 2 months ago ongoing mindset training through the SugarWOD app. So it presents itself just how you would get your gymnastics training or weightlifting training through a True Coach or any of the other apps, but it's ongoing mindset training. So you basically have an app now that you can open up and gives you really simple things to do on a weekly basis. New training comes out every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. There's like an athlete check-in where I ask you those questions I was talking about that can be really effective and helpful in the coach-athlete relationship. So it's pretty cool. I was excited about doing something that no one else has done. It's an experimentation and growth for myself too, to continue to evolve with the times and put out content that can be consumed in a way that's valuable and effective for the athlete. So check that out, drivenmindtraining.com, or on the SugarWOD app and social media. And if there's anything I can help you with, you can shoot me an email, dawn@drivenmindtraining.com.
I love that, because there's that general programming that I was talking about earlier. That's exactly what I was getting at. What can folks do on a daily basis if they're not working on anything specifically, even though, yes, that's very valuable. You now have this available, and that's exciting to me. It's something that I can certainly point athletes to for sure. And hopefully they'll go check that out, because those things can be very beneficial, general, especially if the coach or the developer of the program has the experience like you have. You've been working with athletes in this regard for a long time. Just like if Dave puts out a general gymnastics program, as much as I don't want to praise him any, I would recommend that, to someone. Totally. And there are a lot of general programs out there that I think are not up to par, up to what they could be. But this one excites me quite a bit. So I'm glad you put it out there, and hopefully that's going well for you. So guys, be sure to go check that out. And also be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Also check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Ollie Chad. And on behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante. And until next time, guys, thank you all for listening.